So you got this Canadian lobby group, anti-oil, taking money from the city of Calgary, the province of Alberta, Stephen Harper, taking money from oil companies, taking money from foreign foundations, taking money from foreign embassies. But my last point is my saddest. It's about my friend Preston Manning. Remember a few months ago when I spoke at the Manning Center conference in Ottawa? Well, obviously Manning spoke at his own conference too, and what he said was so weird and shocking, I couldn't believe it. I've known Preston Manning since I was a teenager. I worked for him for 2 years as a staffer, for 10 years as a volunteer. I've interviewed him a dozen times on this show. You can imagine how surprised I was to hear him say this.
He contends that there's more effective ways of tackling environmental problems, including global warming, proliferation of plastics, urban sprawl, biodiversity, than by unilateral treaties, top-down regulations, and other approaches offered by big governments and their allies.
Hang on. Preston Manning thinks a top problem for Canadians is the proliferation of plastic? Say what? Urban sprawl in Canada, the world's second largest country, global warming that's been halted for 15 years? This from Preston Manning, who led the opposition to the Kyoto Protocol when it was first being debated. What was going on? Now, Nancy says that Manning is on the board of directors of Pembina. He's not, but he is on their volunteer advisory council. But still, what the hell? What's going on here? And I asked Preston about all this. I asked him why at a Manning Center campaign training event, that's supposed to be for conservatives, why were there Green Party activists getting a Manning Center training? Why at the Manning Center conference, where he gave his anti-plastics global warming speech, were there activists there from the Tides Foundation, like Kai Nagata, the vicious anti-oil sands propagandist, paid by foreign money? What was he doing there? What was the hard left anti-oil sands Vancouver Observer website there in full force? A propaganda magazine founded by the sister of the Tides Foundation boss. What were they doing there? It's one thing to be a green conservative. There aren't many. Usually they are just normal people who say they're for property rights, but there are some libertarians who really specialize in green conservatives, like our friend Bjorn Lomborg or Patrick Moore, the former Greenpeace boss, who came to their point of view on their own and often don't have a big NGO structure. So what were these anti-oil sands NGOs doing at the Manning Center? Does Preston Manning take money from Tides, from the Rockefeller brothers, from Pembina? Why is Manning turning left on the environment, turning against the very oil patch that he has done so much for over the years? Now, I'll show you excerpts to Preston's reply to me here. He says he's on Pembina's council because, and I quote, "It gives me an opportunity to advise them that market-based solutions to environmental problems are preferable to micro-regulation by government. I've been on this theme for a long time, and it's my advice to any environmental group, left, right, or center." Hey, that sounds good, but it's not working, is it? I mean, a carbon tax is a tax. Carbon offsets are a tax. They pretend to be free market ideas. You trade credits, carbon tax prices carbon, but they're imposed by the state. No one sane would pay another person for the right to exhale carbon dioxide, the right to drive your own car. That's not free enterprise, Preston. I think they're convincing you more than you're convincing them. Now, Preston told me that he wrote his own speech at the conference and that the Pembina Institute was not involved with it. In a way, I'm glad to hear it. But in a way, it's terrifying to me that my old friend Preston Manning, on his own, came up with a top list of environmental problems, of which one of the most pressing is the proliferation of plastics. What? On the carbon tax paper, I asked him about the fact that the Manning Center sponsored research into a carbon tax, and he wrote this: "Academics are invited to make a contribution to some subject," and these papers are accompanied by the mutual disclaimer that their views don't necessarily represent ours, nor does their participation mean that they necessarily support our position. Okay, whatever. Yeah, of course. That's how academics work. But why would you fund a pro-carbon tax academic chosen to receive money from the Manning Center's limited budget to write about a carbon tax? Why do you choose to study a carbon tax if you don't want to have them propose a carbon tax? It's not an accident that this happened. I asked him about the carbon tax, and here's what Manning said. He said, "I've long advocated so-called full cost accounting with respect to energy production and the production of other goods and services. I have argued that tax is the wrong word, there being major flaws with both the current conception of carbon taxes and cap and trade." But look, Preston, burning carbon is not a cost to anyone. It's not an externality, as economists would say. Carbon dioxide is not poison. I'm exhaling it right now. Plants breathe it in. There is no penalty or cost being foisted on others that has to be accounted for by companies by paying someone else. Here's what Manning said. He said, when I discuss this subject with the oil sands folks, I urge them to insist that if pollution taxing is to be applied to them, it should also be applied to every other energy source. So where is the reservoir tax for the hydro people, the radiation tax for the nuclear people, the pollution levy for the solar wind people, since no energy source is environmentally neutral? Preston saying, well, you can carbon tax us if you carbon tax everyone, and water tax them and hydro tax them. That is not the small government answer. That's not the conservative answer. It's certainly not the scientific answer. It's a big government answer. It's the Pembina Institute answer, phasing out oil with taxes. Now, I asked Preston about funding, his funding, and he categorically told me in 2 different replies that he does not take money from the Rockefeller Brothers, the Tides Foundation, Pembina, or similar anti-oil sands groups. And I'm sure glad he said that, and I certainly want to believe him. And since the Manning Center doesn't disclose their list of donors, I guess I'm going to have to take his word for it and accept that his newfound belief in global warming and the threat of plastics and urban sprawl and biodiversity is a natural progression for him. I asked him about the Manning Center training Green Party activists at their Victoria seminar. Here's what he wrote back to me. He said, no Green Party activists were recruited. One attended under false pretenses. But I spoke to the instructors at that session in Victoria who say that at least 4, maybe 6 Green Party activists were at the Manning training camp, and they were certainly not hiding their identification. In fact, they had the phrase Green Party written right on their name tags, their Manning Center name tags. They were open about their party and their left-wing ideology. They were anti-conservatives being trained by the Manning Center. These are the people who went on to help put Elizabeth May in office and win a seat for the Green Party provincially. They were trained by the Manning Center. Preston's account differs from instructors who actually were in the room teaching the course. Now, I asked Preston about the presence at his conference of Tides Foundation anti-oil sands activists like my friend Kai Nagata. Here's what Preston said to that. He wrote, anyone's free to register and attend. Our recruiting efforts are focused on conservatives, but the various themes like green conservatism attract others with interest in the subject. Look, that's most of Preston's note to me. I love the guy. I was a youth activist for him. He's a great conservative. He led the charge against Kyoto. But sometimes he says things that surprised me. In the early 1990s, I remember him giving a speech saying that the Reform Party was like a hockey team with a right wing and a left wing. Well, it doesn't really work that way, I don't think. A party can't be both. There are too many irreconcilable issues. There are yes or no. You can't have a maybe. That's why we have votes in Parliament, because we can't all get 100% consensus on things. We call for a division. That's actually how it's phrased, because the world of ideas is divided. Let me leave you with Preston's last tender message to me. I thought he said, Ezra, I should remind you that in the real political world, if you're an elected official, as I have been, you will encounter and need to engage people of all stripes and opinions, not just those who agree with you. And if you fail to do this, you will find your influence limited rather than expanded. Now, I appreciate the advice, and he does have experience that I do not have. It's wise to reach out to people beyond a small base of support. But there are some people on the other side, paid lobbyists, for example, who cannot be persuaded. No matter how hard you try, no matter how reasonable you are, they're like paid lawyers hired to sue you, hired to get you. They're like terminators. They cannot be bargained with. This is their job. If a Pembina Institute lobbyist gets money from a foreign embassy to promote the carbon tax in the bosom of the city of Calgary, you're not going to convince them that they shouldn't support a carbon tax in Calgary, because then they lose their foreign money. The Tides Foundation has 44 different anti-resource NGOs on their payroll in Canada, some of whom were at the Manning Center conference. You cannot negotiate or bargain with them. They would lose their funding. You can't win them over. In fact, if you try, you will be the one going to compromise by becoming a little bit more like them. Like pretending that a carbon tax or carbon pricing is a free market idea. You can pretend that in your own mind as if the free market would price the right to exhale. You'll be convincing yourself, not them. That's the problem with conservative politicians, with oil companies, thinking that they can convince Pembina or the Tides Foundation. if they only work with them and maybe support them and maybe pay them at their galas and out of tax dollars. Look, Pembina is not getting any more moderate, people. They're not moving. All the compromising is being done by the free market side, the conservative side, the oil side. Pembina still viciously opposes the oil sands, the Keystone XL pipeline, the Northern Gateway pipeline, the Line 9 pipeline. They oppose all of it. In all the years that Preston Manning has been with Pembina, he hasn't moved them 1 inch. But they've moved him, whether he acknowledges their influence or not. Shell and Suncor have not influenced the Pembina Institute. The opposite has happened. Ralph Klein and Ed Stelmach and Alison Redford did not make Pembina more pro-oil patch, but they did plant wacky ideas in the government's mind about carbon pricing. Alberta, did you know? Alberta actually has a carbon tax, the only one in Canada. Who's convincing whom? Now, I'm for free speech. I believe in a full debate. I believe in the right of extremists to be anti-oil and anti-Canada. I just don't think that Calgary taxpayers should have paid $340,000 for a Calgary version of the Green Shift. I don't think Naheed Nenshi is truly representing his constituents by doing fundraising videos for Pembina or taking secret lobbying meetings with them. And I don't think that my friend of more than 20 years, Preston Manning, is being true to conservative values here. And in terms of his advice to me, well, look, I don't think his views win elections either. Stéphane Dion showed how unpopular the carbon tax is. Australia, just this week, elected a majority government partly on the promise of scrapping their carbon tax. It's bad enough to water down your own principles to win, but it's pointless to water them down to lose. The carbon tax is a loser. The Manning Centre is supposed to be a conservative watchdog, helping shape the Canadian battlefield to let conservative political leaders win. I think on this file, the conservative watchdog, well, it needs a watchdog itself.